I watch people with their children a lot, hey?
Yeah.
And so when my son was a pretty assertive kid and tough, like he had a real will. And, when he was 9 months old and started to crawl around, I taught him what no meant. And what no means is stop doing that or something you don't like will happen to you. That's what no means.
Right.
And so when he was 9 months, he was starting to take books off shelves and get into the plants and so on, because he was starting to crawl around. And so to teach him what no meant, I just grab his leg when he wasn't doing something that I didn't want him to do. And, he would squawk and bitch and complain. And I'd say, no, no, no. And I just hold him until he gave up. And sometimes he would cry. And the reason he was crying is because he was frustrated and angry that I was mucking about with him. It's like, fair enough. He wanted to go explore. And, fair enough, kid, you want to explore. But you can't tear out the plant and get dirt all over the rug. And you can't go into the electrical cords, like, no.
Right.
And no. And so I had done a lot of behavioral training by that time. And by the time I did that for, say, 6 or 7 days, and soon as if I just said no, he would just stop, and sometimes he would cry. And then the week later, if I said no, he'd just stop. So it took like 2 weeks, eh? And then I knew that if I said no, he would stop. And so then I could let him explore. I could give him a lot of freedom. And then I'd have people come over to my house with their 2-year-old or 3-year-old. And because they had never taught the child what no meant, they never gave, because they didn't want to impose on their freedom, let's say. They couldn't give the child any freedom at all. They had to wander around behind them all the time because they never knew what the child was going to get into. And so then you start to hate your child, right? Because instead of having a bit of free time and just being able to say no to this kid while he's playing around on his own and giving him some freedom, you're just nonstop monitoring this child, and you're mad because you don't have a life. And we had another couple come over, and they had 2 kids that were like 4 and 5, and they were just horrible. We sat down to eat. We wanted to have a conversation, and we put a basket of bread out, and the kids just grabbed the bread and they ate all the centers out of the bread. And the parents were all embarrassed about it, but they didn't do anything to stop it. And, in their minds, they thought, well, aren't we permissive and nice, and we never say no to our children? But they didn't notice that they actually hated their children, because how could you go to someone's house and you want to have a conversation? You just met them, and your children embarrass you to death, and you think you're not going to get resentful about that?
Right.
And you think you're not going to take, and so here's how people would take it out on their kids. So imagine that happens. Now you go home and you're pissed right off, but you're not going to let yourself know that because you're such a nice person. Then your child goes off and draws a picture. Maybe they put a lot of work into it, eh? Then they come running up to show you. And that's a real good time to give them a pat on the head and say, look, isn't that great? But you're pissed off because you were embarrassed. And so you look at it and you think, and that's all you have to do. It's like, that's not really worthy of my attention. You don't have to say anything mean. You just have to not attend in this manner. And then you got your revenge. And you think you won't do that, man. You know nothing about yourself. And you read in the paper sometimes these mothers or fathers, they do something brutal to a child. And I know I know how that happens. It's like no disciplinary strategies in the house.
Yeah.
The kid is driving the mother or father crazy. And then maybe the mother or father, they're hungover one day, and maybe they just broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and maybe they got, hell from their boss, who's a tyrant, and they haven't stood up to them. And the kid does the wrong thing at exactly the wrong time. And maybe he's actually pretty good at that by then. And it's like, out comes Satan himself. Yeah. And all hell breaks loose. It's like, I wouldn't do that. It's like, there's almost nothing you wouldn't do. You just don't know yourself very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the ability to set limits and to say no and to tell people that, it's not right for you to bang on my house at this hour, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That takes a little bit of toughness on your part. You have to be kind of willing to put yourself on the line. Maybe that person will get angry and hit you or something, or maybe the war will escalate. But you have to be willing to take that risk, because if you don't, then you set no limits, and who knows what they'll end up doing. But a lot of this permissiveness is people are just basically afraid. They're afraid of any kind of confrontation. Yeah. They're afraid of any kind of conflict. And through conflict and confrontation is how you actually grow. It's actually how you develop as a person.
Hey, so here's a cool stat. This is really interesting, man. So there's been some great work on what behavioral markers predict divorce in couples counseling. Really solid work. Okay, so here's one predictor. If when the couple is talking in front of a therapist and one of them or the other or both roll their eyes, there's like a 95% chance they're going to be divorced within 6 months. And that's contempt. They've become so disconnected because they don't communicate, because the resentment has built up that they now have contempt for each other. But here's another cool fact from that research. So if you have people track the number of positive and negative interactions with their partner, you can calculate ratios, and then you can see what the ratio is that lends itself to the successful maintenance of a relationship. And so you might think, well, the more positive interactions, the better. And that's kind of true. So if it falls below 5 positive to 1 negative, the relationship is in danger. But if it rises, 5 to 1. And you can kind of see that because, negative events are more memorable and more powerful than positive ones. And so you know that if you read YouTube comments, But if it rises above 11 to 1, the relationship is also in danger. And you could imagine that what you want in a relationship is, well, you want support and love, and you want most of your interactions to be positive, but you want your partner to slap you now and then when you're being stupid.
Right.
And then if they don't, out comes your inner tyrant, right? You're just going to dominate them if they don't push back. And so if you have any sense too, if you have a partner, you want to encourage them to put limits on you. Especially if they're a little more timid than you temperamentally. It's like you don't want to run roughshod over them because they know some things you don't.
Right.
But it's so cool that it's above 11 to 1. So that means too much positivity is the death knell for a relationship. And you want someone with some spark, right? It's like, well, what if I push you a little bit? Even teasing. You want the person to be able to push back a bit.
And you have to be able to accept it as well, because some people probably in those situations can't stand any kind of criticism. They're so fragile that if the other person pushes back, it kind of escalates into a battle. So real strength comes from the ability in a relationship or any kind of really intimate or otherwise, is the ability to take that kind of criticism, to actually welcome it when people set limits for you and tell you that this kind of behavior is wrong. And then you can evaluate and assess yourself.
Yeah, unless you want to repeat it stupidly forever, right? I mean, that's the alternative in a relationship. Is I don't like conflict. I've been in plenty of conflicts, like plenty, way more than is reasonable. But I don't like them. Like I meet people now and then. I went to talk to Douglas Murray in New York City about a week ago, and we were talking about conflict. And he said, he doesn't mind a fight. And I've met lots of people like that they like that combativeness. And I don't really. But what I really hate is deferred conflict that escalates. It's like, it's better to get it over with now. And you're a fool if you think that running away from it is going to, like if someone cuts you off in traffic and they're obviously really angry, it's probably better just to get the hell out of there because you're never going to see that person again, and you don't want a situation like that to escalate because
they might have a gun or whatever.
Well, you just don't know what's up with them. They're really strangers.
Yeah.
But, if you're dealing with someone day in and day out and they're pushing on the top of your head to stop you from growing, which I think Lucy used to do to Linus in the Peanuts cartoons. Yeah, because they had a dark side, those cartoons, man. The comics, they sure did. Yeah.
Oh, they would be canceled now, probably.
Yeah, they couldn't exist now, I don't think. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, because a lot of Schultz's characters, Lucy was actually not a likable character at all.
Right,
and she was really oppressive to Linus, who was a good character. Yeah. And good humor always has an edge. But that you don't get rid of the negative part of yourself, especially that aggressive part, by pretending it doesn't exist. That quite the contrary. That just doesn't work at all.